if you took all of the good things that planners and advocates and cities try to do, what would happen if you did all of them? And you did all of them on top of each other in the same place, and you did all of them correctly. This neighborhood is so densely amenitized that it's almost like eating a dessert that's too rich.
I love this stuff so much. I love that.
This is part of the beginning of the sense of dread, but we'll keep going. Um,
I'm in love, and you're like, the dread is setting in.
Look around a city and you'll see a multitude of stories waiting to be told, but you might not realize just how complex and layered the explanation is. Join our motley cast of urban dwellers and planners as we research, question, and sometimes fall deep down a rabbit hole. I'm Ellen,
I'm Matt.
and Tess.
and this is Multi-Story.
Hello, welcome to Multi-Story. We're excited today to talk with Tess and a second Tess about how cities get planned and what that means for the people who live in them and the people who walk around in them. A lot of this was spurred from a walk that Tess and I took around a purposefully designed neighborhood in Malmö, Sweden. So we want to dig in to that.
The particular neighborhood, Ellen, where we took a walk was in the Västra hamnen area. It basically means Western Harbor. And it wasn't too long ago that this area was a port and an industrial area. More recently, it's been undergoing a giant wholesale redevelopment, this massive port area. Ellen, you visited this neighborhood with me, and I kind of dragged my partner and you to go visit.
I actually love Västra hamnen, so I don't think I was being dragged. I was excited to
Okay.
visit and to see your point of view.
Well, regardless, I think this is the day that this entire line of thought began for me. So I want to begin this conversation where we began our trip and just share my first experiential impressions as a visitor to this place. And my first impressions were just how thoughtful and intentional and agreeable this neighborhood is. We strolled through a park full of joggers and picnickers. We went across a pedestrian bridge that was framing a boat harbor with different water activities. We sort of lingered on a pleasant boardwalk, and there were people lounging and hanging out. And then we sort of meandered into this shady landscaped alley to buy some ice cream.
Shady as
We
in blocked from the sun, not shady alley as in New York shady alley.
That's an important distinction. Yeah, yeah. A well shaded and
There
green
you go.
alley. We sort of wandered off the seaside promenade and through the interior of these neighborhoods, and there's these little cozy car-free streets and pocket parks with rain gardens and trellises and swinging benches and playgrounds. There were all kinds of different homes and residences and like dozens of different styles. And this is just very quaint. There's these watered planters and parked bikes along these Scandinavian alley facing homes. It's just a very pleasant little place to walk around. This led out to a plaza with a water feature that ran out to the sea, and in the other direction there was a big Calatrava designed high-rise tower. There were these like little moments of surprise and delight. We walked past these naturalized drainage areas that had shops on one side and parks on the other. There was this old industrial infrastructure there that had been redeveloped for new uses or preserved and restored.
I love this stuff so much. I love that.
This is like urbanist catnip, right? This is part of the beginning of the sense of dread, but we'll keep going. Um,
I'm in love, and you're like, the dread is setting in. That's
yeah,
great.
I did have a thought. It's like, is this just because inherently I feel like I don't deserve good things? So when I go to a nice place, it makes me feel bad. Like maybe this is all just a psychological exercise, but I do think there's something more to this here.
Well, I think
Yeah.
it's interesting, Tess, that like every photo you've shown are some of my favorite memories from my trip too. Like the seaside stuff, the parks that are built in, the walking and kind of being amazed by these great views and the perspectives. So I have been accused by other friends of grass is greener syndrome, to where it's like, yes, you get to do that because you're visiting, but what you know what it's like to actually live there.
Well, if we did live there, our neighborhood would be linked by this new network of bike paths and pedestrian spaces. And convenient to Malmo Central train station. And as we sort of been talking about, this neighborhood is so densely amenitized that it's almost like eating a dessert that's too rich. It's not a perfect neighborhood, it's not a perfect city, but in a place like this, there's a peek into this baseline quality of life and urban experience that's just much higher than I think many people expect for where they live. And that's my experience as a tourist visiting this. But first impressions aren't everything. And a visitor experience isn't the end all of city life. So after we visited Ellen, I wanted to know more. And I did some digging on the history of the area and the development that's been happening. I learned that originally this was an oil port. It was a shipyard where they manufactured ships. It became a industrial location with a Saab factory. But by 1996, all of the industrial uses were gone and the land was sold back to the city. And at the time, in the late 90s, there was an economic crisis facing the city. There were some environmental issues that the city was facing. And so they sort of looked at this port area as a way to reinvent and redevelop the future of the city, create a new image for the city, create a new way of doing things, that sort of thing. You can see here the launch where the ships were launched into the sea. So the city saw value in redeveloping this area. They had this idea of creating a modern eco-city to help respond to their economic issues and environmental issues. And this all kicked off in 2000. There was a European housing expedition here that they decided to focus in this Västra hamnen area, this Western Harbor area. And they invited all sorts of different architects and planners to each do their own like vision or like model units or model block or neighborhood kind of thing. And it was a showcase for new ways of living, new ways of building. And that was the first piece in turning this entire area into a big mixed use development. There's a big focus here on sustainable design. They've dubbed it the City of Tomorrow. They claim to be the first district in Europe that was fully carbon neutral. They use an aquifer thermal energy storage system for heating and cooling. So it's not just a visitor experience. There's lots of intentional design and thinking about how this place is developed and what they're trying to do with it. And so after our visit, after learning all of this, I think I was left with the impression that if you took all of the good things that planners and advocates and cities try to do, what would happen if you did all of them? And you did all of them on top of each other in the same place, and you did all of them correctly, you might end up with a neighborhood kind of like this.
Waiting for the other shoe.
Yes. Yeah. So to sort of hint at that, Ellen, I think when you told your friends in Malmo that we were going to go here, maybe they were a little bit surprised that I wanted to see this area, because to them, it's not the place they would choose to go, right?
It's not the place they would choose to live. I think they would go, and I went plenty of times as a tourist to the sea part of it. They were surprised that you wanted to go in further to look at the buildings and the development part of it beyond just the tourism part of the nice boardwalk and the access to the sea. And then when I was telling them about like my friends' broader group of friends, like, what'd you do today? And I said, we went and looked around Västra. Someone without prompting was just like, yeah, I don't really feel like it has much of a soul. They don't feel like it had much of the same vibrancy as the rest of Malmo. So it was interesting to hear that because I'm more on your side. I think it's really interesting to see all of the different development, how different the vibe is and what can happen when you develop purposefully.
Yeah, I think that hits on something that was eating at me, which was what is the soul of this neighborhood? Matt, what do you think so far?
I mean, I feel like it's of a piece with other neighborhoods like this that I've experienced, and they can feel a little bit like fresh out of the wrapper. I've also been to Malmo, but it's been 10 years, and my recollection is just the bustling nature of it and just how many bikes are everywhere. And this photo particularly, like I see two humans. Where are the people? These look like beautiful public spaces. Everywhere else I went in Malmo, it was bustling with people at every corner. So what's going wrong here? My recollection from 10 years ago is that that twisty tower was kind of out on its own in a sort of underdeveloped area. And it was separated by a pretty big traffic sewer from the rest of the city.
That's what I remember too, is probably the first time we went in 2016, 2017-ish. It was beginning to be developed, but there were still big open areas that were under construction. So it
Yeah.
felt very industrial still and very much like, well, I get it. I see that they want this to be something. So that's not even 10 years ago. So for it to still have like changed that much in 10 years.
That's another aspect of this is how it is sort of popping up overnight and what are the
Mhm.
implications of that. But Ellen, this wasn't the only new neighborhood that I saw that day. This is Hilje, I think. This is also in Malmo. I got off the train on the way to see you to look at this neighborhood. This is another new, giant, transit-oriented, mixed-use, complete neighborhood that developed almost all at once. And it has its own unique story as well. It's a transit-oriented neighborhood with the sustainability focus, this award-winning school that you see in the foreground of this picture here.
Is that what that solar macaroni is? It's a school?
I don't know what solar macaroni means.
It's just a piece of macaroni with solar panels on the top of it. Yeah,
Okay. Oh,
okay.
I see
Yes.
a single piece of pasta. Yes, that's the
Yes.
It's a macarono.
yeah. Yeah, yeah.
Alma macarono.
Okay. We
Eh, macarono.
no, no, no. Um, okay, so the school is across from this grand park, and in this grand park, we saw this playground where school children helped to conceive and design this living city that had little shops and homes and streets where all the little kids could learn how to be good urban planners. You know, it's just speaking to my urban planner heart here. We walked along pedestrian paths through cozy courtyards. And of course, there's comfortable and wide bike paths going everywhere. You can take them to the main shopping center that happens, as you said, Alan, has an arena, a mall, there's a rail
There's the
station
bikes.
there. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you can contemplate what it all means from the roof of the wall, which is a green roof where you can see all the way to Copenhagen. So this is a different neighborhood, different amenities, but there's similar dynamics. It's a large, dense, transit-oriented, mixed-use neighborhood, full of amenities, full of quality infrastructure. It's developed all at once so that all of these pieces intentionally fit together and you can feel it because you can just tell that it's not accidental that a path leads to a destination or that a set of homes surround a particular amenity. It's all intentional. So by the end of the day, I've been immersed in these pleasant, beautiful, functional places. And this is when a little ball of anxiety lodges itself in my brain and won't let go. So I don't know if I shared this with you, Ellen, but the next day I visited like 5 more of these in Copenhagen. So again, apologies for my Danish, but this is Nordhavn in Copenhagen. So I was across the bridge visiting this neighborhood. It's another former industrial port turned into a complete dense mixed-use neighborhood. This is an area that operated as a port for more than a century, but in the early 2000s, with a growing city population, there was a decision to redevelop. There's about 6,000 people who live there today, but there's a plan for 40,000 eventually.
Were those actual water towers that were adaptively reused or some sort of
Yeah,
industrial towers
I
that are
don't
now
know if
residential?
they were some sort of industrial towers that were converted to, I think that's office use now. I think those are offices.
I I'm so in love with all of it.
Yeah.
Keep
Yeah.
going.
So again, this neighborhood has its own story. It's envisioned as a 5-minute city. All of the different services and amenities are designed to be concentrated close together. It's a mostly car-free neighborhood. You can get to it by the metro or water taxi or by bike. It's designed to be easy to get around, have lots of options for how to get around. I have a quote here from someone who worked on it. They said, while often city governments put in transport, culture, parks, and playgrounds, and then just leave the rest to market forces, here the retail landscape is not left to chance. Which is to say that in this development, they very specifically curated local retailers to create the mix of amenity and services that they wanted the residents to have. That was also a coordinated, coherent, and intentional process. They're proud of
Mm.
all of the cultural activities, social activities, recreational activities that are available in the neighborhood. And affordable social housing is also a key component of the use mix in the area. So again, it's just these intentional, amenity-rich, thoughtful, master-planned neighborhoods that are just sort of popping up overnight. And like I said, Northtown isn't unique in the city. I visited several others like it while I was there. And I think you begin to understand maybe why Copenhagen is often rated as the happiest city in the world. They just have neighborhood after neighborhood that are just full of all of these quality of life features that make you very comfortable to be there and live there and spend time there and visit there and all of the rest of it. But this isn't just a Scandinavian phenomenon. So this is a little bit closer to where I live, La Confluence in Lyon, France, former river port, rail yards, warehouses. Again, now it's a massive mixed use development, housing, offices, community facilities, a shopping center. There's a focus on sustainable design, creating a walkable neighborhood. There's a lot of focus on the livability of the neighborhood, enhancing transit, making sure there's amenities available for everyone. There's a focus on celebrating architecture and design. So every year they invite another international architect to design like the next block of the project and bring a new vision and perspective to what the neighborhood can be. So we've talked before, a multi-story, about Seestadt in Vienna, which was a former airport site. So not a seaport, but an airport. It's also a brand new city sprouting out of the ground, a mix of city built and city subsidized housing. Is one of the things that is unique here in this new Vienna neighborhood. Eventually 20,000 residents and workplaces when it's complete. And as I was researching it, communities from around the world looking to it as a model for green, affordable housing. And here's a picture of when I say these neighborhoods pop up overnight, you can see like they're just going from nothing to everything all at once.
When I lived in London, this is what Battersea looked like when I lived there. And it felt like, to me, they looked like giraffes. And I just always felt like the giraffes were like having a meeting at the end of the day when they were all like faced the same direction. They're like, oh, they're sleeping.
I'm
Yeah.
going to be the first to say
So
this could be another topic, but the way that Europeans deploy tower cranes is just like
Mm.
10x over what Americans do, and I don't really understand why. I'm also curious about the workforce implications because right now, in Kansas City, we're building giant data centers and battery plants, and it's sucking up all of the construction workforce. So, how do these projects like distort the workforce implications for construction industries? Separate topic, probably, but I'm curious.
yeah, I think there's a whole line of thought about how these projects are organized and financed and phased and implemented that's really interesting to me as well. So these are some more pictures from Seestadt in Vienna. You can see lovely places, lovely amenities. And as you said, Ellen, I was recently in London in Battersea. So London's
Yeah.
another very fast growing city that has these entire planned cities popping up wholesale. So you mentioned Battersea. I think King's Cross is another recent example where there's all sorts of stuff was happening all at once. And maybe even Canary Wharf is a little bit older example in London of this.
It's interesting that you're comparing Canary Wharf because to me that was a place like it was so far east of where I lived, but also felt so corporate. Like there were high rises and a lot of places to work, but not a lot of places to live. I don't know if that changed with Battersea. I think Battersea's development was more, it's actually more retail focused, but there are lots of housing going in too. But like the power station itself, the rehab of that and all of the development that then grew up around it was very fast.
Yeah, when
Yeah.
we look to
And
find a soul, right, the difference between Battersea is you can feel its legacy. Like they have
Mhm.
that bar that's the old control room inside. But when you go to Canary Wharf, there's very little to show you what used to be there or any feeling of the past.
I don't know if that's quite true. I think you're right that there's more of an office mix. Also, it was developed decades earlier. And so there were different expectations for what a dynamic
Mhm.
new district use mix should be. But if you walk around Canary Wharf, there's hipster lights and picnic tables running under giant sea cranes and port equipment. You cross bridges with all of the old port infrastructure. All the same little bits that you like, Matt, I think are there.
Yeah, on the
Um,
edges. There's a museum to the shipping industry over there. Yeah. I now that
yeah.
you call me out on it, I'll acknowledge that there is. I just maybe I like it less, and so I'm discounting those things.
Okay. Yeah. Well, okay. But hold that thought and think about why, and then think about what that might mean for these others as we look at them. So, as you said, there's more of a retail focus here. The old power station in Battersea was redeveloped as a shopping center, but around it, an entire neighborhood was also developed. New amenities, new infrastructure, new public space, a reuse of the historic industrial relics that were around the area. Just another example of these complete cities sort of popping up overnight. So those were some European examples, but I did want to think about this phenomenon in North America as well. And a few examples came to mind. This is Olympic Village in Vancouver, which I think falls into the same category, dense, urban, amenity rich, all developed together at the same time.
It looks relatively sustainable too. There were all kinds of green roofs.
Yeah, I think that's a theme with all of these districts, which is that there's a very intentional effort to address a lot of the community needs and community benefits that unplanned development is not responding to.
Hmm.
In the United States, maybe Navy Yard in Washington, D.C. is a potential example of this. It developed pretty quickly. It's not quite the same, though, because it wasn't fully master planned in the way that some of these other ones were. And I'm sure there's other examples in the United States, but for me, a lot of the US examples served more to highlight the distinctions and fit this pattern that I was seeing.
This is the one that I immediately thought of. Yeah.
So this is Stapleton, Colorado, built on an airport, not a seaport, but this and a lot of the others like it, all of these greenfield new urbanist development comes to mind, but I think generally these types of developments are less dense, they're less urban, less complete. They are very intentional and they can be amenity rich, but it's a little bit different than the neighborhoods that we were looking at. And there's also this category of urban redevelopment. So I look at something like South Lake Union in Seattle, Pearl District in Portland, Denver, or the Meatpacking District in New York City. These are big urban redevelopments, but they're sort of more incremental. They're less planned. They're more heterogeneous. They have more stakeholders and decision makers involved in them. They're not quite as coherent and integrated and master planned in the way that those others were. So what am I talking about here? What are these things that I'm sort of looking at and thinking about and trying to group together? I think there's some characteristics that all of them have in common. One is the scale. They are very big. They are entire neighborhoods. It's not a block or a development site. They're entire neighborhoods or mini cities that are getting developed together. They're dense. There's a lot of mixing of uses. There's amenities. There's infrastructure. And there's a rapid timeline. These are places that are popping up very quickly, even if it's over the period of a decade or more. In the scheme of the history of these cities, these are places that are rapidly emerging. These types of projects are like enormously complex. They're difficult to pull off. You need the right economic conditions, the demographic conditions. You need city support. You need developer capacity. You need financing, a good regulatory environment, urban environment, on and on and on. And I do think that looking under the hood at all of these different projects and their implementation, there's a lot of lessons for all kinds of cities and all kinds of circumstances. And I'm also sure there's plenty of critiques of how these projects are implemented. We could have critiques of the phasing or the engagement or the financing or all kinds of things. But as interesting as all of that may be, those are not the questions that started to gnaw at me as I visited these places. I found myself uneasy with these developments on a more philosophical level. And so I thought, multi-story is the place to sort this out.
Okay, so should we anticipate your objections?
So you kind of ended in a spot that reminded me of some of the West Bottoms development that's happening in Kansas City right now, which I feel like, to Matt's point, if I'm anticipating some of your objections or your other side of the coin parts of this, it's like the West Bottoms is a really unique spot in Kansas City that has had residential and commercial spaces, but is now going to be developed in a much bigger way to add a lot of density, but also will take away from the character of that area. And I think that that's what a lot of these places are missing inherently, which we've hit on a little bit already. It might just be because they're new and they sprung up so fast that they haven't had that minute to breathe or to find themselves. You could say they're more adolescent in their development. But one of the biggest pushbacks from the West Bottoms example is that it's not going to have the same character. It's not going to have the same draw that brought certain aspects of the population out to it, and kind of keeps the heart of that area.
But relatively speaking, nobody was there, right? Like that's the
Relatively
challenge.
speaking, nobody was there. And I
Yeah.
do think one of the things I wanted to reiterate and what Tess just said too, so like the Nordhaven in Copenhagen, I think it's like 2 kilometers square space that's going to house 40,000 people and 40,000 places to work. It's very dense. I don't know how that would compare to like a New York square miles to square kilometers, but Kansas City isn't that dense to begin with, but we do need housing. And so how do you balance a development that adds the housing if you're going to also lose the character and basically heavily gentrify an area that was doing okay, like had its own draw in what it was?
So this will probably sound similar to other critiques or realistic, like downtrodden takes that I've had in the past, but I feel like this is yet another symptom of late stage capitalism and like the best possible way to respond, because you don't get the kind of organic small scale development in collective action when you need economies of scale. The alter ego is coming out.
Yeah. You said late stage capitalism, and now City Lover Tess is here.
Because, yeah, the economies of scale that are required, the returns that are expected from investors, you can't take risks as like first actors. There's so much speculation. So you need basically like what's happening in the West Bottoms. You need to make a big enough move to ensure that you are making a transformation that's going to stick. And it's just hard for us to go back to a time when like everybody moved kind of in the same direction in a small scale, that we just can't do that in our current structure of capital markets and all of that. Unfortunately, I wish that weren't the case, but it is.
So you've summoned the voice of anxiety in my head, Matt. So let me introduce you to City Lover Tess, who has an axe to grind with urban planner Tess. City loving Tess is not surprised that something feels amiss when we visit these places. And I think the reason that you have this sense of unease about these planned neighborhoods is because they are not real places. They are place products. So if you think about older neighborhoods sort of have decades or centuries of change, they have adaptive reuse, they have all these layers of culture and conflict and history, and these planned districts are giving you density and services and urbanity sort of all at once. But what they're missing is all of those layers of history that actually give places meaning and significance for people. And there is a French philosopher called Henri Lefebvre, and he might say that these planned districts are produced space for consumption rather than lived space that emerges and evolves around the people who live and use it. So in a more authentic neighborhood, the uses and places exist because there's a use that needs them. So like you have a port because the boats need to go somewhere. You have warehouses because you need to put stuff somewhere. You have markets because people need to go buy things somewhere. And as the needs of the city evolve over time, those uses change, the places adapt, the people respond. That's not what's happening in a master plan development. This is land and structures that are immediately positioned as real estate. They're positioned as an asset class. And so even if they have amenities and public housing and all of these things, those things aren't there because they emerged from the use and the activity of the residents. They're there because they make the project more marketable and consumable. And so, I'm sure you've seen this before with all kinds of different developments. The developers will choose like which set of apartment amenities are trending best when they build their project, and they'll balance that with the pro
Mhm.
forma, and then they'll use those amenities to attract and retain tenants. These planned districts are just sort of that writ large. There's nothing about that process that involves the people who live there or what they need or how these cities are evolving or what they need to be. It's totally disconnected from the logic of the place and the people.
But it does anticipate their needs, right? I mean, all of our housing is a consumptive good in some ways, right? Like we choose to live in neighborhoods for their amenities. This is just like being real about that. And because the market is who we use to deliver it, that's how they do it.
And to add to that, I think it's a bit of learning from what we've seen in the past. I think it was Nordhaven you said that they purposely are also building the retail that surrounds the neighborhood of like everybody needs to have a place to buy clothes or, I don't know what exactly they were, but like there's a certain number of tick boxes that if that were very close to me, I wouldn't have to go very far. So I think to me, that's a bit of taking what it is that we've learned and making it to where it actually is accessible. You aren't finding yourself in a food desert when you know that you could go to work and to your house, but they forgot to build a grocery store. So like make sure you check all of these boxes. But even when you were saying that, it in my mind started to feel accidentally isolating to where if everything is within that 5 to 10 to 15-minute radius and you never have to leave that radius if you don't want to, now you're missing out on the broader picture of that city. You're missing the option to, or like the opportunity to go to the next neighbor over, and maybe your kid goes to school with that kid, or your parents live over there, so you want to go visit them, or you don't have a hardware store that has the exact thing you need to fix your front door or whatever is broken that day. It is nice to just go 5 minutes down the block to get that thing, but it also means that like now your view has just totally become only a 1 mile radius or whatever that might be.
Is this your
Whereas the
anti 5 minute city diatribe? You're like 15 minutes or more, please. We need a bigger
no,
world.
like I think and this might be what Tess is trying to get at, right? Like there's kind of this balance that when a city develops naturally
Yeah,
that
this thing
you're
has hard
managing.
edges, right? Is that what you mean?
Yes,
Well, I think I see what you're saying about your bubble shrinking, your perspective shrinking.
right.
But I think now that I'm urban planner test again, I think
Right.
urban planner test is with you, Matt, that you can complain about these areas as produced space, but it is being produced to meet needs that aren't currently being met. And the kind of process that City Lover Test was celebrating, where all of these uses and amenities percolate organically, is not great for a lot of people. That kind
No.
of process distributes amenities and services unevenly. And there's a lot of places that are underserved for decades or centuries. We have transit deserts, food deserts, places with poor schools, with lack of green space. And that kind of incrementalism may work for people who already have resources, but there's a lot of people without the capacity or resources. And in those areas, they're just sort of languishing and waiting until gentrification sweeps in. At least in a planned district, you can guarantee a baseline of equity and services from day one.
Not to
Well,
mention
and I
just amenities, but we need housing, right? So do you want to try to do that in a very expensive scattershot infill kind of way? I mean, that would be better, but that's where we need incremental development on a small scale. We're not going to
and I
solve
guess
the problem that way. We need to build a bunch of housing, and this does it.
yeah, and I guess I don't know that a lot of neighborhoods are waiting for gentrification to come in and be the solution. I think a lot of neighborhoods just need the investment that you referenced, Tess, who has left the call very rudely. Um, to as per my rebuttal points. But if you were to take the investment in these purpose-built situations, but distribute it to the neighborhoods that do need the fill in or the improvements to make them feel more welcoming, more livable, how does that then raise the city up without gentrifying the current existing population out of their homes? I think the word gentrification comes with so much baggage because it
Yeah, it's
has this
almost
history.
meaningless. Yeah, because
Mhm.
it means so much to different people.
I think about this a lot with my work in bike lanes, actually, because there are areas of Kansas City that could wildly benefit from safe cycling infrastructure, but they are push against it because all they've seen is the downtown spaces or like takeovers or something that feels very forced upon them. And so I think a lot about how do you work with those cities to meet their needs and to see if there's a way to come together to find this middle ground of, if we add a bike lane, it doesn't automatically mean that we're pricing you out of your home. At the same time, the only thing they see is adding a bike lane means more development, more prices.
Yeah.
Yes, city lover test, you're back.
I'm back. And I agree with what you're saying, Ellen. Thinking about it's not whether we invest in these places, but how and who decides, right? That's a big
Mhm.
part of this. But to push back on urban planning tests, who was saying, these planned districts are delivering a complete place from the start, beautiful public realm, services, mixed uses, affordable housing, transit, waterfront access. Maybe, but these are very explicitly curated environments. That's sort of what you're saying. They're not it's not
Mhm.
what people are asking for. It's curated and delivered. You're making a product. You're not you're not serving a city. And what these places don't have are all of those accidents and improvisations and serendipity and all of the different
Yeah.
layering of uses and people and experiences over time. Those things aren't decoration. Those aren't window dressing for a city. Those are the necessary core of a great place and a great city, and a new planned district can't manufacture them out of thin air. It's something that's inherently unplanned and unplannable, and urban planner Tess doesn't like that because it undercuts the entire premise of the existence of her profession, but it's the truth.
Going back, Ellen, to your point about gentrification, and I prefer the word displacement because gentrification has kind of
Mhm.
lost its meaning. And I think making neighborhoods nicer is a good thing, actually, if you control for the externalities, which
Yeah.
is controversial sometimes. I think one of the challenges, though, is if you want to build amenities, you face those kind of risks. It's very hard to take an incumbent neighborhood and fill it with those amenities because everyone's got an existing stake. When you have a clean slate, like an old industrial site that's unproductive for the city, and you can create all those amenities and deliver them without all the complications of incumbent neighbors and the different blockades, the counterintuitive blockades that we don't want amenities because they're going to drive up values, all of those sort of real challenges. This is the way that you can actually deliver a great neighborhood that implements planning best practices without having to beat your head against a wall with
Mhm.
incrementalism on a tiny scale.
It makes
Yeah.
me wonder if these purpose-built spaces are actually, like, gentrified from the beginning, and I mean that in a somewhat detrimental way, of who then can move into these very purpose-built spots. I guess my question maybe for follow-up would be, what does the diversity within these purposefully built spaces look like? Because in a place that has existed for a long time, hopefully you've just naturally grown a mix of economic diversity or racial diversity and where everybody does feel comfortable. Versus if this is a purpose built space, does that mean it's inherently more expensive, which automatically puts a filter on who can move in? Or does it just attract a certain set of people who say, oh my gosh, someone has thought through this and that feels very easy and very doable to me. I do want to move there versus the city lover tests, right? Who would be like, no, I want the small charm of this street that has like this different type of feel. So I don't know that we'll know. And I don't know too, because so many of the examples are European, which has its own special blend of diversity and issues, what that all winds up looking like 25 years down the road.
But you can be intentional because you're designing it. So you can, the test you mentioned, there's social housing mixed in a lot of these developments. So you can have a lot of different typologies for different life stages. Like you can't just do that. It's very hard to do that in an existing neighborhood. So I feel like
Right,
that's
I
right.
think
just another design challenge.
it's hard to manufacture the diversity.
Okay, but I think, hi, it's Urban Planner Tess. I'm back. What I would say is, if you're worried about displacement, if you're worried about who is participating in the neighborhood, City Lovers Test's entire argument is perched on the top of a fragile house of cards. Because as an urban planner, I know the history of the places that are the models of these layered, historical, rich, livable neighborhoods. And I know how those neighborhoods developed. And for all of these authentic neighborhoods that everyone loves, at the top of the list for their origin stories are urban renewal, slum clearance, exclusion, colonial racist legacies and just good old fashioned like mass displacement, right? So normally the moment when those places are declared authentic is the exact moment when they're displacing the poor or the working class or the immigrants or the other minorities. Like there's no such thing as an authentic neighborhood. And frankly, as urban planner tests, I think we can do a lot better with our intentionality than we have in the past.
Ooh, shots fired at yourself. Oh,
Yeah,
here she
I
is.
know. I know. It's so weird.
I had I guess, a question for both of you is so will these be authentic in 20 years then? Is it just that they need to get scratched up, like fresh off the lot, and they need to be taken around the block a couple times and have an imprint of change and some organic evolution and the types of people that live there move, and then we'll feel like they're authentic? So we should go ahead and build them now and just let them age gracefully. Because, like, if you think about my neighborhood, the core of the building stock was built within 20 years of each other. You know, it was 1880, and everyone built a brick building to warehouse their goods, and that's what's left of it is what our neighborhood is, and we've infilled it back in. But it became authentic because it's got, 150 years of evolution.
I think that's my point. Yeah, it's like kind of that's why I'm curious to see how these purpose-built spaces do age. And I think this reverts back to the Bentonville revitalization conversation that we had a couple episodes ago. It's just new. It has to happen. We do need housing stock. We do need development. It has like built cities have to keep evolving. That's just they're going to whether you want them to or not. And this is absolutely one type of evolution. And so, what does it look like? What are the knock on effects? We won't know them for 25, 50, and 100 years. And
But
so, I guess, go
whose
ahead.
vision, whose
Mhm.
intentionality are we talking about, right? Because in
Right.
an authentic and lived space, you have lots of different actors. You have residents, you have small businesses, you have community groups, you have chance accidents that are all sort of shaping the outcomes. And in
Hmm.
these planned projects, the vision is coming from above. It's coming from a municipality or a development authority or an architect or a master planner. And maybe there are public consultations, but not about the premise of the existence of the project, not about how and whether it should exist or what it's intended to be. There's no way to master plan these communities without privileging the values and aesthetics of a particular group or a particular ideology or a particular class or time period. And no matter how progressive and altruistic those values aspire to be, those examples that we looked at in Copenhagen and Malmo, let's say they have like a Scandinavian modern green ethos or something like that. That ethos still comes with a particular social and political worldview embedded within it, right? You
Hmm.
can't escape that. So I think as city lover tests, it's as much about who is deciding as it is about what is decided.
And
But
to your
that example is presumably like state or state involved, right? So it's like a collective vision. And I just would have enough hope in humanity that like the collective vision and the expertise of the planners that go into that will inform that in a way that's more just than the way we do it now, which is like the people with the resources and time and privilege to like show up to meetings and stop everything from happening, right? Like right now we privilege the NIMBY.
what I'm noticing too, in just processing what City Living Tess is saying, these purpose-built spots, they're just being built. They don't have the NIMBY pushback or the YIMBY pushback, right? They're going to be built. They are being built. At some point, like the plots will be filled. There will be something built in each spot. But as the city evolves, the voice that will be added back into the conversation is who does actually live there, who wants or doesn't want something, because right now it's just a blank canvas for the redevelopment. The urban planners basically get to say, whew, let's just do it right, because there's not a thorn in their side saying, but that used to be insert meaningful thing here.
But urban planner tests would say that your pluralistic and organic neighborhood is not democratic either. They privilege those with property and capital and political power to shape the space. And if we're honest, immigrants and renters and the poor almost never have agency, even in this bottom up kind of story. And like, and at least in a planned community, we can acknowledge and recognize those disparities. We can go in with open eyes. We can create an intentional process for participation. We can build intentional structures for how we manage and govern these places. We can be strategic about addressing inequality or affordability or inclusivity, everything else that's important to us. At least
I
we
think
can
this urban
be
planner
open.
test is really smart, actually. Yeah.
I think this is where urban planner test is on too many clouds. Like, I completely agree that the urban planners are developing this with all of those things and the best of intentions in mind. But you cannot just go in and develop and be like, and then go out and market it like, we want you too, poor people, come on in. Like, it's not the same way to develop it and make sure that it is actually accessible, welcoming, and bringing
Yeah.
in true diversity in those ways.
City Lever Tests agrees with you completely, Ellen, because Urban Planner Tests thinks that you can do all those things in a plan development, but you can't. Even to name those developments as complete neighborhoods, you see the hubris in this entire undertaking. There's a sort of functional and aesthetic totality in these projects, the architecture, the streetscapes, the parks, the mobility, sustainability. It's all coordinated and integrated, but that's not how life works. Like
Right.
life is incoherent, and over time residents will and should subvert these functions, repurpose the uses, personalize the spaces, and there's no amount of intentionality that can perfectly prepare and integrate for the needs of everyone. And it's megalomaniacal to think that you can do that for an entire
Yeah.
city.
No, no,
And
they're
and
just, this is just a start. They can do all those changes. They're just starting at a great place.
It is, you're
yeah,
right that it is the start, but it's a start that has a bias to it.
yeah,
You can't start and say, no, no, if we build it, the whole of society will want to live here. That's not correct. Like, so you
yeah.
can't just say, no, no, it's going to change, it's going to shift. We're going to make sure. It's not true.
And why
Sorry.
would we want to try anyway? Because it's the surprise, the change, the adaptation. Those are the things that we value. Those are the things that make a city dynamic. Those are the things that we need. So why are we intentionally trying to snuff out the very thing that makes our cities, that gives them a reason
Because
to exist?
people need
Agreed.
places to live. And would you rather
People,
give them places to live that let them live in sustainable and enjoyable ways, or do you want to just let the market build shit on the edge of town?
I think that's more that I want someone, there are plenty of places within a city, and I'm thinking a lot about Kansas City when I'm saying all this, but I think it's going to apply to any city, right? There are going to be plenty of places within that city that need affordable housing more than what a new development would provide. Like, you're not going to get people from one side of the city, metaphorically, but sometimes literally, to say, oh, there's housing over there in this really pretty thing that definitely looks like it's not for me, versus going into a community that needs affordable housing and saying, we need to figure out a way to build here that's not going to scare people off and will work with them to build what they need so that that community can thrive in a way that they don't feel threatened.
But if we want to talk about giving people what they need or having a community that's really adaptable, let's talk about what unplanned neighborhoods give us. They give us like obsolete street grids, they give us polluted soils, unsuitable building stock, your authentic neighborhoods are also creating barriers to livability and adaptation. There's nothing nostalgic about New York City not having alleys for trash collection. There's nothing good about virtually every Paris apartment being inaccessible to someone in a wheelchair. Uh,
I mean,
at
trash on
least
the street in New York is authentic. It is an authentic New York
it is
experience.
authentic, but right, but like at least in a planned neighborhood, we can escape those types of constraints. We can create the places that we want and that we need today, that work for us today. And sometimes the board is just so convoluted that you need to reset it. But I also want to like fight back against this idea that this vibrant chaos is an unmitigated good, because we can romanticize it in the abstract, but in practicality, like the trash, it means noise, it means trash, it means overcrowded, it means
Yeah.
unsafe or inaccessible infrastructure, it means poor sanitation and all of these other urban ills that we have spent centuries trying to alleviate. And the funny thing is, we've in some cases done that so successfully that we've forgotten all of the conditions that drove these improvements in the first place. I guess the last thing I'd say is urban planner tests would say that this foresight and coherence and intentional planning is not an imposition, it is a relief from these urban ills.
So this is my question. Can we take the template that these like purpose-built spaces are working off of to the areas of the city that could truly benefit from something similar, and then add what city lover tests would like on top of it? Can you like add a sheen or a skin, if you will? Like, can you customize it to like, hey, here's the template. Here's you have housing and office, and you have retail that works, and you have metros, and you
Coming in
have
hot.
livability.
Don't
And
don't fall for
here's
this, Ellen. Don't fall for this idea.
no,
Because when urban planner test says reset the board, what I hear is erase history, or at least like
it does
sanitize
definitely
and
feel like
package history. Yeah. Like
it did feel
we're
like
gonna
urban planner was coming in with a bulldozer to like a couple square blocks for sure.
yeah.
I think City
Yeah.
Lover Tess is just a NIMBY with cool glasses.
Oh,
Okay. Well, okay. So okay, Matt, you're gonna preserve a smokestack here. We're gonna have a dock crane over there, but we're gonna sanitize all of the messy history of labor and pollution and conflict and everything that led to that place. These planned districts are selectively plucking from the history that made those locations desirable in the first place to like essentially create branding concepts. In Malmo, we had the eco district of the future, and in Copenhagen, it was the 5-minute city. Lyon was a cultural confluence, but real places. It is marketing. It is just marketing. That's what I'm saying. The real places don't have this filtered narrative. They have lots of overlapping and contradictory stories and perspectives. They're not easy to market. They resist the sort of pithy storytelling, but they are more rich and meaningful. And I think the unease that some people feel in these planned districts is that they can feel that hollowness of these places when they're in them.
Yeah, I can feel the hollowness, but I think it's better than, the alternative is just to leave a bunch of empty boat slips from 100 years ago, because it's what was there. Like, cities are dynamic, they have to change, and we need to build housing. Like, is your alternative like make the whole city a museum to what it was 100 years ago and lock it in time because this was a port, and stop pretending like it's something else? Like, that doesn't strike me as a very good solution either.
to me, it
I
feels
agree
like
with you, Matt. I completely agree.
each city just needs to sponsor like an urban planning boot camp, but each neighborhood has to submit their tribute to become their urban planner. And it's like, okay, you're now in charge of helping this piece of the city grow and change in an authentic way.
The best politician is the person who doesn't want the job. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, it is, but also like it's like a liaison, right? Because I think I assume what happens a lot is that like a development company wants to come in and like they have good intent, like let's assume good intent for building something here, but they're not good at communicating and truly coordinating with and cooperating with the neighborhood where they want to build. And then it just becomes we're just going to plop our ideas here, versus it being something that the city recognizes you need more housing here. And so here's how to work with everything. And I think I'm probably just creating a different version of utopia that also doesn't exist. But like, I guess my brain really, really wants there to be a coming together middle ground of we acknowledge that cities are dynamic, cities are going to change, but they can do that in a way that is fair to the neighborhood. And now
I have a
just
middle ground for you, Ellen. You don't have
okay.
to live here, but you are increasing the housing supply for the community, thus putting downward pressure on housing prices across the entire market. You are creating an option for people that is accessible at multiple price points. You can live there or not, but I don't know that like any of us would argue like leave it an empty port because our community is better that way because I like looking at where the ships used to go.
Yeah, and let's not pretend like that beloved, authentic, layered historical neighborhood is not also glossing over history, right? Like that's kind of what they're known for. Like industrial exploitation and tenement squalor turns into quaint cobblestone street, you know?
I mean, look, I've got
Um,
exposed brick. You got to believe like that was on a marketing pamphlet, right? Like, of
Let's
course,
Yeah,
like
yeah. But to go further, like if the idea of redressing these historical wrongs is seen as erasure of history, then like yes, maybe we should be doing that. Like at least in a planned neighborhood, we can confront and reinterpret that history deliberately rather than hoping it invisibly manifests at random in a way that doesn't perpetuate injustice, right? Like we
I
to
feel like
leave it to chance seems crazy. At least that's what Urban Planner Test thinks.
this is a chaotic part, an orderly part of a chaotic larger picture.
like we're just getting such a window into what it's like to be in Tessa's brain.
It's like living in her head full time.
Yeah.
I had one other about the hubris concept of the more cosmopolitan of the Teslas, I guess, or the more stylish ones.
Careful. Go
Uh,
on.
the
No,
the
no, no.
more
Yeah, look, you're speaking truth, and you shouldn't be silenced.
I don't know that I don't see it purely as hubris. I mean, uh, of course, being the defender of it, but it is not just like making up like we think that the city should be like this. It is using what the laboratory of cities has yielded as best practices over doing it for generations and centuries. So it's not like we're just saying like we think that all of the buildings should be this color because we are in charge. It is technocrats saying we have extracted from years of the laboratory of organic city evolution and the way that we live and the way people have demonstrated they love to live and the way that communities work really well and create prosperity for people. And we're going to go ahead and build that this way because that's the way it's proven to
I
work.
feel like the hubris in that situation is assuming that that then is the correct best way.
That's exactly right. The problem with that is that you're creating a place that is designed around a certain ideal of society or economy or sustainability. And these places can feel like they're newly interpreting the past. They can feel robust and responsive to current needs, but they're also very fragile. These sort of branded districts are often only as deep as their marketing, right? And even if it's not just a marketing ploy, even if it's part of a well-intentioned master plan, it's being based on a set of precepts or expectations or assumptions about how cities work as a singular vision. And we can see what happens to these types of places when conditions change, right? Like the retail environment changes or demographics shift or climate issues intensify. And suddenly the foundation on which all of these carefully planned districts were created begins to move. And the coherence that they had, the responsiveness they had, the function that they have begins to unravel. But in a more authentic and livable neighborhood, these are places that have been beaten up and buffeted and shaped by centuries of different forces and changes. They have all of these layers of ideas and values that are waiting there to thrive when the conditions are right for them to thrive. And so, I would argue that they are a more resilient type of response than trying to pretend like we know the exact solution to the puzzle and we're going to assemble the puzzle's complete and everything's perfect.
I think what I just realized too is a metaphor is that we haven't considered, or maybe that might help here. It's like this template could have been built on a really specific data set. The way that like if you only build an AI model off of this gentrified data, it will produce a gentrified spot for you to where if you haven't added in all of the nuances that come with different cultures or different best practices, even truly across the world, if you're only looking at a certain subset of development, it will produce this as a great template, if you will. And this is what I think was like in the back of my mind when saying, even if you choose retail, it might not welcome in every type of diverse person, is like, okay, so if your retail doesn't include a hair salon that can cater to African American hair, then you're now saying like, yeah, you could live here as a Black person, but you're going to have to go over there for one of your most basic needs. So it didn't actually incorporate everything that has to do with that person. And so it's not actually as complete as you want it to be.
But this isn't different than any other neighborhood, as long as it's allowed to
No.
change. And I would argue, to City Lover Tess's point, these existing neighborhoods are all battered and evolved. I don't think we let them change anymore. So they really aren't responsive to their communities in a way that if we can plan it from scratch, it can be. As long as we let the new neighborhood evolve and acknowledge its shortcomings and open up and change the service offerings under the influences of the folks that live there and patronize those places, I think it's fine. It just becomes part of the city. And I would argue like that same necessity of the need for dynamism and change needs to be in all of our neighborhoods because they're all failing us right now.
Yeah. And it's not like you can't look at unplanned places and see what the outcomes are, right? It's like for every beloved historic district, there's many more places that are just sprawl with neglected infrastructure or like patchwork zoning. There's no reason to think that all of those layers of history and authenticity are necessarily going to produce something better than what we can plan. This idea that the invisible hand is going to gently shelter us from change and outside forces is kind of crazy.
Yeah, like why are we throwing all this friendly fire at the neighborhood that we all acknowledge is like idyllic when we're just like letting suburban sprawl and market driven development go without any criticism? That's obviously not inclusive. It's not designed.
I really, really like living in a bubble where we get to argue about how to make the idyllic even better.
Yes.
But it's not even like, Matt, you mentioned, are these areas resistant to change? Even if they're not resistant to change, if they are constrained to this incremental evolution, then that's not going to be enough for all of the urgent crises we face, right? Climate change, housing shortages, failing infrastructure. Those are things that need urgent, rapid transformations. And we can't just wait and hope and cross our fingers that some new equilibrium rises to the surface. These are systemic problems. They need systemic solutions. And it's our obligation to proactively and comprehensively intervene to do something about it.
Yes. And we will do it as humbly as we can, and we will do our best, and we'll be imperfect, but it will be better than not doing it.
As humbly and nimbly.
We will do it nimbly, but not nimby.
That's right.
So I'm back as a single person now. Thank you for indulging my
I
schizophrenia.
enjoyed the duality.
Is when you have the scarf but not the glasses.
Yeah, I just sort of went halfway here.
I feel like I had to be more, ideologically consistent as just one person on this call.
I did not feel that pressure at all.
I think where I've essentially landed on this is that, Ellen, you were desperately seeking for a way to bring both together.
My middle child way.
That was my instinct as well. Like, these planned districts are solving real problems intentionally. They do risk being produced or artificial. They can be beautiful and functional, but maybe that isn't everything that they need to be a complete and livable city. We can love unplanned places for their messiness and authenticity, but a lot of times those places are just locking in inequality or inefficiency or all kinds of problems that are worth solving. And I think at the end of the day, it's not about picking one or the other. And as you can, I'm firmly rooted in both perspectives, as you've surely noticed. But I also don't think it's about like cherry picking aspects of one or the other either. I think where I've landed is that the tension between these that we've been bouncing back and forth in, that tension is the goodness. That is where something new and better comes, right? There's like a dialectic relationship here between planned places and lived places. And in the tension between those, something new and valuable emerges. And it's that sense of contradiction and unease that is the engine that is generating the cities we live in. Like, it's creating the dynamism and the change, and it's shaping the place, and it's giving it value. So I think where I've landed is that cities are, and they have to be, both planned and unplanned. They have to be coherent and incoherent. They have to be idealistic and mundane. They have to be functional and whimsical. They have to be ordered and messy And when they are all of those things together, then they're doing what they're supposed to do, which is be the heart of our society and the places that we love and all of the rest.
Yeah, I said it earlier, even the plan is part of the chaos, right? And my question would be like, would any of us rather these places not get built? And I feel like no. I just hope that they have that sort of self-consciousness and humility to take those considerations of what they mean, and that these kinds of conversations are happening in the rooms where people are coming up with these kinds of plans.